Okay, so welcome. My name's Janet Newsham and I'm the chair of the Hazards Campaign. This is our Thursday talk, Racism and the Disproportionate Impact on Health and Safety, Organising to Protect Workers. So the Hazards Campaign, if you don't know, is a UK-wide network of resource centres and campaigners and supports those organising and campaigning for justice and safety at work. And tonight we're going to be joined by three fantastic speakers. We've got Wilf Sullivan from the TUC, who's the Race Equality Officer. We've got Moe, who's the Unite Union London bus worker, and Ameen Hadi, Chair of the North West Unison Black Members Committee and Salford Unison Branch Officer. But before we start, we're pleased to be joined by an NEU officer, a branch officer, Monica Gort, I think, who's going to give you an update on the sacked safety rep Lewis from the NEU, from North Huddersfield Trust. And I'm sure you'll all join with me in sending solidarity greetings to her and her other colleague, I think that's Sharon Morgan, that's been dismissed. And we will hopefully encourage you to sign the petition as well. And I think it's going to be put in the chat box. So, Monica, would you like to start?
Hi, Janet. It's not me, it's Melanie, who's, I think she's on the call. Yeah, Melanie's the officer at Kirklees branch.
Yeah,
she's going to speak. Yeah.
Sorry, Melanie.
Okay.
Okay, over to you, Melanie.
Thank you. I'm the membership secretary at Kirklees NEU, National Education Union, and I'm here to talk about Louise Lewis. She's the NEU representative at the North Huddersfield Trust School, which is in Kirklees, and she's worked at this school for 7 years, and she's been our representative there for 4 of those years. She's an extremely active trade unionist. She's obviously repping her school. She's Kirklees NEU branch president, and she's chair of Black Lives Matter in Kirklees. In her role as trade union rep, what she'd been doing is she'd been attempting to get Mr. Fell, the head teacher at North Huddersfield Trust, to discuss the whole school risk assessments and individual risk assessments for vulnerable staff, during the COVID crisis. But he continually refused to meet her. And he also contacted the school HR department and then the Kirklees NEU office to try to have her removed as the NEU rep. He seemed not to understand that not only do heads not choose who represents trade union members in a school, but they also actually have a responsibility to liaise with those accredited union reps, to try and sort out health and safety in the school. When he had no joy attempting to bypass Louise, he just suspended her. He had her leave the premises on October the 1st, and that was the day the health and safety executive were due to inspect the school. And she was gone before they arrived. The head teacher has refused to reinstate Louise despite our efforts, and he's refused to work with the NEU to ensure that health and safety concerns are addressed at the school. We're now trying to put pressure on the head to reinstate Louise. All the governors have been contacted, and the school NEU group is now taking part in an indicative ballot for action. We've got 2 petitions going on. I think I've put them in the chat. One came from the community because Louise actually, although she's a teacher at North Huddersfield Trust, she actually is part of that community there as well. And they're calling for her to be reinstated pending an investigation into the actions of the head teacher. And also we've got another official NEU petition. The terms of the suspension mean that Louise herself can't talk about it, which is why I'm here today and not her. So far, we have had quite a lot of support and publicity. There's a socially distanced community protest planned, and we've had an article in the Examiner newspaper. So what we're asking people here to do really is to sign and share the petitions and send messages of support. We need to continue to put pressure on the head teacher to reinstate Louise. No one should be threatened with losing their job for trade union activity, especially when they're trying, as Louise was, to ensure safe working and learning conditions at a school. We need to get Louise reinstated and send a message to managers that constructive engagement with trade union reps is necessary and positive and is actually part of their job. And we must make sure that we don't lose our trade union rights, which were so hard won. So this is why I've come today. I'd ask you to please support our rep, Louise, and help us get her reinstated. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Melanie, and I'm sure you've got our full support from this evening, but you have our full support from the Hazards campaign as well. You know, no safety rep should be put in that position, especially now when we need safety reps helping to keep people safe and well and alive at this moment in time. So absolutely important job, and encourage anybody that you can to sign the petition, and anything else you need us to do, then please just let us know if there's more support we can give you. So best of luck, you know, in your endeavours to get her job back, but you know, and put right in that school what should be put right in terms of the health and safety. So thank you very much for that.
And thank you for letting me come and let you know about it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So just move on then to tonight's agenda. We hope by the end of the evening we're going to have answers to some of these questions. So why is health and safety an equality issue? Why have Black workers been impacted more, infected and died by COVID-19? And were they disproportionately at risk from injuries, ill health and work-related illnesses before the pandemic? And what has management's response been to the increased risks faced by Black workers? And how can workers respond to these workplace risks? So there's a lot of questions that we need to answer, and hopefully our speakers tonight will be addressing some of those issues, but certainly in the discussion afterwards, hopefully we can start to answer them. So the Hazards campaign is built on challenging and campaigning against unsafe and unhealthy conditions at work. And even before the pandemic, we were campaigning against toxic workplaces, which unequally exposed low-paid and those in vulnerable contracts to poor health and unsafe work. In April 2018, Rory O'Neill in the Hazards magazine warned us, "Are you sick and tired of too much work for too little pay? Well, you are also likely to be sick because of it. Workplace risks go up as employment grades go down, with a potentially devastating impact on health." And in April this year, he called it class war, and Rory reported that in low-skilled elementary occupations, workers were almost 4 times as likely to die from the virus as professionals. He said that for all the talk of essential workers, it turned out that as the crisis progressed, that workers really were disposable. And in the same edition, the BMA, British Medical Association, called for an immediate action after the delayed official report concluded that racism could contribute to increased COVID risk for Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. The report set out the scale of structural racism that Black and ethnic minority groups people continue to face. And Unison called for the report to be acted on, and that Black workers and communities deserve to have their lives valued and protected. In October, Doreen Lawrence said, "Minority ethnic people have been overexposed, underprotected, stigmatised and overlooked. This has been generations in the making. The impact of COVID is not random, but foreseeable and inevitable. The consequences of decades of structural injustice, inequality and discrimination that blights our society. We are in the middle of an avoidable crisis, and this report from the Labour Party is a rally cry and break that clear and tragic pattern, to break that clear and tragic pattern. In the health and safety world that we belong to, we would say it is foreseeable and preventable, and we think that there's answers to it all. So we look forward to listening to the speakers. We've got Wilf coming up first, and then Moe, and then Ameen. And so very welcome. And I know that today the TUC have just done a press release, and I'm sure Wilf will talk about that, about new research that's just been released. And so over to you, Wilf. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much for joining us. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. No, I'm delighted to be here. Actually, I won't necessarily talk about our research, but I will try and address the questions that that are being asked for this meeting, because I think they're really, really important, especially in relation to the link between health and safety and equality, which is something that over the years hasn't been talked about very much. Strangely in some ways, because certainly in terms of work around anti-racism and the discussion around anti-racism historically, you know, there was always this reality that Black workers were doing low paid and often the most dangerous jobs, often in situations where because they were in low paid dangerous jobs, they didn't have the protection that they needed at work. And that combined with actually, I think the fact that, over the years, and history teaches us that, health and safety are a battleground between unions and management. And it's one of the areas that I don't think that we paid enough attention to, into the fact that when you raise these issues, management really kicked back hard. And so, hearing about Louise, hearing about Sharon, they are trade union representatives who are a long line of trade union representatives who have been attacked for raising health and safety issues. And of course, the most famous example of that has been, in more recent years, has been what came out in the blacklisting case on building sites, where, workers were denied access to a living simply for raising health and safety matters, in their areas of work. So, when we come to the pandemic, what the pandemic did was just expose what was already there. What we saw was absolutely foreseeable. And I remember being asked, at the TUC, right at the very beginning of the pandemic, what I thought were the policy issues for Black workers. And I had a simple response, and it was, people will die. And people didn't think, I don't think my colleagues quite understood what I was talking about when I just said, forget policy, people will die. Because what we know is that the levels of BME in work poverty, because of the kinds of jobs they do, is disproportionate. We know that Black workers are working disproportionately in emergency occupations, in service occupations. We know that Black workers since the 2008 crash have been massively overrepresented in casualised work, and that, encompassing all of that has been the government's hostile environment policies, which people see as a migration issue, but as the Windrush scandal showed, isn't just a migration issue, has a direct effect on people who are British citizens as well. And that hostile environment is not just in relation to migration, but it's about how people are treated and marginalised at work. So it was no surprise to me when actually what you started to see was a disproportionate impact in terms of deaths amongst Black workers. And of course, there was a lot of stuff in the press and from policy makers going, oh, well, we have to do some research to understand why this was the case. Well, it was it was obvious what was the case was. It's obvious why we still have high rates of COVID infection now. If people are forced to go to work in a situation where they're unprotected, right, and the government is not interested in making sure that employers take the necessary measures to make sure that the workplace is safe, then of course those people that are out there working, that are exposed to the virus because they're dealing with people every day, or they're in inappropriate environments in a factory where people are crowded together, that they've got no PPE when they're on hospital wards dealing with the sick. It is no surprise they're going to get the virus. And it's no surprise if they're disproportionately exposed to the virus, that actually more of those people will die. It's not rocket science, but obviously in terms of government and employer response, it's always complicated, isn't it? It's always made complicated. And certainly, you know, I liken the government's response to the Titanic hitting an iceberg, and instead of saying, where's the lifeboats, saying, let's have an inquiry about how the hull got in the boat, right? Because actually, when you look at what the response has been, both from government level and from what we know of employers, the TUC done a survey a few months ago looking at what employers had done in terms of risk assessments, and only about 35% had bothered to do risk assessments, and I'll comment on those risk assessments in a minute. You know, if 70% of employers can't be bothered to do risk assessments, right, no wonder people continue dying, you know, and it's a crisis, and it's a health and safety crisis. And part of the problem, I think, in terms of the way that that our opposition tries to frame it as some kind of a medical crisis. But it's not a medical crisis. It's a health and safety crisis. It's a crisis of people not being protected in their workplaces and in their communities from a virus, which actually we know is not that difficult to protect people from if proper equipment, proper social spacing, you know, a proper provision is made. But what we've seen instead, one, employers not doing health and safety, proper health and safety risk assessments, a concentration on the idea that this is somehow to do with people's bodies, right? Oh, you know, it's comorbidities. They're more likely to, you know, have high blood pressure and all these kinds of things. But there's no consideration about how those things are tied with poverty and people in those that are placed in those particular situations. And if you took a similar set of white workers who were working in similar situations and exposed them to COVID in the same way, you know, my argument is the results would be exactly the same. So it's not a matter about people's bodies. But one of the things about concentrating on people's bodies is two things about that. One is it blames the victim, right? But secondly, in terms of the response where we have had risk assessments, my criticism of them is, once again, they've been individualized. It's about the individual, right? Oh, well, is this person more likely to be at risk of COVID or not? And what hasn't happened is proper workplace assessments of the workplace. And what is needed to protect the workplace, because we don't work as individuals in some kind of little cell, you know, we work in workplaces that are collective environments, and therefore it's important, yes, it's important that people look at people's individual needs in terms of workplace assessments, but it's also critically important that when we're talking about work assessments, that we look at the workplace and ensure that there are proper arrangements in place in the workplace. Now, one of the things that I did was, off the back of it, was try and produce some supplementary advice for the TUC around this, because it seemed to me that we have to be much more focused and much more aggressive in terms of trade unions about what are we saying in relation to health and safety and health and safety protection. That it isn't centred on the individual, that it's centred on what arrangements need to be in that workplace to protect not only BME staff, but everybody, both in terms of, you know, what happens within the workplace and what happens in relation to doing the job as well. You know, have people got the proper protective equipment? Are people effectively social distancing? Are messages to the public clear? Are the consequences of people using the service not obeying the rules laid out and clear to people? Are managers properly trained? you know. Or and on top of that, there's the other things in terms of people being able to, if they are not, if they are feeling ill, not feel that they're in a situation because of their job insecurity, where they've got no choice but to go to work. Because I know that's happening to many people, and it's certainly happening to many of my neighbours. And as somebody said to me the other day in the street, oh, it's ridiculous, all these people are so irresponsible, you know, we're in a lockdown, hardly anybody's got a mask on, right? And I said, well, the fact is that if you're forced to go to work, you know, you're spending 8 to 10 hours a day in a workplace where the employer doesn't give two figs about your health and safety, where there's no social distancing, right? There's no protective equipment, and then some idiot from the government comes and tells you that when you're supposed to go shopping, you should put a mask on. I said, how are people expected to take that seriously? I said, that's why you don't see it, because people become fatalistic. They end up saying, thinking that there's nothing very much they can do about it. And at the end of the day, if we're going to get it, we're going to get it, as one of my neighbours said to me, you know. And our challenge, I think, in terms of actually going out and aggressively negotiating these things in the workplace, is to say to workers, and especially to black workers, it doesn't have to be like this. This is why we have health and safety legislation. This is why we have health and safety rules. This is why you need to acquaint yourself with what those things are and get involved in the campaigns around health and safety, because this is about protecting your life. It's always been about protecting your life. But actually, Boris Johnson isn't going to do that for you, right? The only people that can do it is you coming together through your unions and actually forcing management to do the things that they really need to do. Because, and I'll finish with, as I said before, it's not rocket science. And the problem with this approach, especially with the individualized approach, and we began to see it, that in situations where, you know, you've got redundancies coming, you know, businesses in trouble, that what happens in the employer's mind in terms of risk, in terms of BME workers, is they say, oh, well, the easiest way to avoid the risk is not to have them in the workplace, you know? And I've already had people saying to me, well, you know, I didn't get that promotion that I thought I was going to get, or I've been made redundant, and there's no reason why I should have been made redundant because the work's still there. You know, all that kind of stuff is beginning to happen. So if we don't really take the bull by the horns on this, the other side of it is going to be, as well as the problems of redundancy because jobs are going, is people being made redundant because actually health and safety is being erroneously used as a measure to get rid of people, rather than doing what needs to be done properly. To avoid doing that, you just get rid of people out of the workplace instead.
Thank you so much. That was excellent, and a really good view from our point of view on health and safety. You know, that we know that employers should be looking at collectively, a collective approach. If we've got a good collective risk assessments in place, then that's going to apply to most people in that workplace. I mean, there might be one or two additional ones that need to be done, but actually we want good workplaces that protect everyone. And I think, you know, I think that's a really good point. And I think the point about people becoming fatalistic, who are being put at risk in workplaces, you know, who don't know the difference because they know that, you know, the risk and they can't do anything about it. And we know that the HSC went AWOL on throughout the pandemic as you know, in the most, and we need to put pressure on our employers. Absolutely right. And we need to put pressure on the HSC and the enforcers, and put pressure on the government to make sure that our workplaces are COVID safe for all workers. And then there's going to be another issue, isn't it, afterwards? It's going to be about long COVID afterwards.
Yeah, you know,
the people that have got the disabilities as a result of having it. But thank you very much for that, Wilf. That was a great introduction to tonight. So our next speaker, I'll move on quickly to Moe, And Mo's done some brilliant work down in London around buses, where we've tragically, there's been a lot of deaths of workers down there. So over to you, Mo.
Yeah, thanks, Janet, for inviting me in. So greetings and solidarity. My name's Mo. I'm a safety rep also for United Union and London Buses. Yes, sadly we've lost 34 bus workers, disproportionately the Black and Asian bus workers that sadly passed away from COVID-19. Yes, we have been doing a lot of work in terms of fighting for safety measures. There has been some, lots of work from the ground level in terms of the bus drivers themselves doing a lot of DIY because employers were not doing fast enough the implementing safety measures such as securing the cabs from virus from transmitting, social distancing, information and advice for drivers. So we had to resort into communicating with bus workers in social media, Facebook groups, to discuss what we can do for safety measures. We've also, during this pandemic, we exposed the employers, the rogue employers, because some of you if you don't know, London Buses is fragmented with private companies competing amongst each others, hungry for profits. So over the years, since it's about 25 years since privatization, and since then we've seen toilet facilities being taken away, nowhere to wash hands, drivers having a wee in the bush and stuff like that. All these things been going on for so many years, and it's a pity that COVID-19 had to come and then expose it. But even we're in the second lockdown, I don't think that they're still taking it seriously. Again, another thing that's been highlighted from COVID-19 is that employers were not doing risk assessments in some of the bus companies. And there was exposure as well that health and safety reps were never been invited into health and safety committee meetings. So these are the things that we didn't know in some workplaces were going on. And we had to fight for full facility time, which we then got about 5 weeks into lockdown. We got full facility time, 5 days for London bus workers, safety reps. But then he exposed as well that how can you have one safety rep in a garage of 700 employees? So those kind of issues came across and exposed. And other things as well that we look into. Why is there in a health and safety committee no balance between the number of health and safety reps and number of management in the health and safety committees? So those are the things that we picked up, and we realized that it was unfair on even those health and safety reps participating in the health and safety committees. They were effectively bullied for so many years and sidelined, not invited in or not constructive, talking shops, all these kind of things we realized were going on. And that's why workers' voice was not transmitted for so many years. The culture of reporting culture was not even there in many workplaces. And there was no wonder that workers were organizing themselves. And effectively, most of them were whistleblowing because some of them were taking pictures of filthy bus cabs, dirty toilets, writing on social media saying, I don't have no toilets there in that location. I don't have a place to wash my hands. My employer didn't provide me sanitizers. My employer's not giving me this. The workers didn't care because they're risking their lives already. Plus, we had backing of our union as well, saying about Section 44, if your workplace not safe, then you have rights. So workers were feeling confident, and there was so many workers, we didn't expect them to be that courageous to stand up. But when they hearing that the colleagues are passing away, they knew that, and it's coming on the news, they thought that, well, we can stand up to our employers. We can say what we like, and we can demand what we like. We can get what we want. And we then started to try and educate a lot of health and safety reps who never been in courses, because they get elected, then they do the workplace reps course because they know there's constant disciplinary culture, and then by the time the next year's election come, or 3 years time election come, they haven't even done a health and safety reps course. So we found so many problems in London buses. It's unbelievable, but there's a lot of learning lessons for the trade union. There's a lot of stuff that we need to put pressure on their employers to start doing. If there is another, say, different virus that we don't know about and that comes about, I think we'll have the same casualties. There's not, because if they haven't learned what are the mistakes that's been made. I mean, we had UCL college doing a report, a study onto London bus workers, the health inequalities and stuff. But they came back and only said, well, there should have been earlier lockdown. I don't think that was good enough, because London bus is one of the most diverse workplaces in London, and one of the most diverse workplaces in the whole country. Frontline workers with workers living in cramped housing, unable to get a house, unable, to get services. Black and Asian diverse workforce. So they have overcrowded, and they have health conditions like diabetes. They have prone to have those kind of illnesses because of the and lack of breaks, fatigue. All these kind of things been going on in the bus workers, like working long hours. It affects their health, so they're already affected by their health. Just before COVID-19, we were running a ballot. We had a 97% voted for on the consultative ballot. We were about to ballot just before COVID-19 on fatigue, breaks, long hours. Still a major issue, but that impacts the workers. I mean, and then again, there's no assessment on pollution. So it's affecting the lungs of bus workers in the cabs. So there's a whole host of issues that affect bus workers. And we could see our employees working from home, flying off. This Christmas they're already flown off. They're not paying us back on pay negotiations. Majority of the bus workers have offered a slap in our face, because they just offered 0.5%, 1%, no bonuses, no COVID payments, working long hours. We don't get nothing. So the way bus workers have been treated is a poor state of affairs. And I hope to really organize and have a proper structure in place for health and safety reps going forward in London buses. There's a whole load of things that we can do in terms of organizing. But I think we've got MPs in this country, and they have the ability to change the law. Why can't we have a law to say, if there is a workplace that doesn't have a toilet facilities accessible for workers, why isn't there an alternative, and why isn't there a toilet? And if there should be a law that there should be a toilet. How can you have a bus worker traveling up and down and no toilets on each end of the route? How can you even have a service? You don't have a toilet, and there's still bus routes. We don't have toilets on each end. They have to find somewhere to. And during lockdown, we had shops closed, pubs closed, so there's still no places. And some operators were saying, well, go to the hospital, and the hospital said, well, we can't let you in because unless you're a patient. So all these kind of things were going on. It's just unbelievable. I think bus workers were really affected by this pandemic. I'm happy to answer any questions later on. I think one of the biggest successes was when we closed off the front doors. We used Twitter, Facebook. One of Transport for London, the public body who issues the contracts, were worried about revenue loss, and we said our number one priority is the safety of our members. And if you want to collect revenue, that's your problem, not ours. You need to move the ticket machine at the back or wherever. Go and find the innovations to collect money. So they eventually gave up, and we had about 6 weeks of front doors being closed. That they could have done a long time ago, and I'm sure that made a difference. Also, it gives that confidence to the worker coming to work that they've got that kind of protection, that the front door has been closed. We've got now like a procedure where we don't let a bus out if the cab is not properly sealed. So health and safety reps have been stopping some buses. Some of them have, they've been trying to shut the health and safety reps, say you can't do this and stuff. So there's ongoing constant battles in the morning. When the buses are leaving the depot, reps are making sure the cabs are sealed off. There's all ongoing battles on the floor. and that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Mo, for sharing that information. That's I think it's really inspiring what you did, and unfortunately it took 34 people to die before we got proper action from the employers there. But the action that you took probably saved lots more lives. The fact that you got yourselves organised and that you did that, you were sealing off the buses and you were making sure that people were, I mean, I remember the pictures, of bus drivers putting up their own screens around their cabs, to try and protect themselves. But all that should have been done by the employer. That was their responsibility, their duty to do that. And we, that's what should have happened. And we should have had the enforcement authorities coming in and making sure that people were doing it. I mean, I think we always remembered at the beginning, we thought, why haven't the HSC, why haven't the local authorities, why haven't they sat down and looked where people are going to be most at risk? That's not rocket science, as Wilf said before, it's not rocket science. Where are people going to be put at most at risk? And they should have done that. And then on that basis, should have been going around and making sure people were protected. And that's what I expected them to do. That's what we expected them to do in hazards, and they didn't do that. And I think your comment about the report that was done, where they said, that it's about it should have been an earlier lockdown, and that would have saved lives. That wouldn't have saved lives really, in terms of the risks that you're being exposed to, because you'd have continued to die as a result of it. And I think it shows to me that the people that are protecting us are ourselves, is our trade union organising, and that's what's protected us through. And we knew that before the pandemic. We knew that where there was trade unions organised, then you were twice as safe. And throughout the pandemic, it's saved people's lives where people have been organised. So thank you very much for sharing that, Mo. That's really good. We'll come back to you. I'm sure there'll be some questions afterwards. So our last speaker is Ameen. And Ameen's at Salford branch officer, but really active. We've had him a couple of times speaking to us, and inspiring, and a worker at the front line. So over to you, Ameen.
Hi, everyone. I suppose where I want to start really is where we're at the moment, because you wouldn't know it from the media, with all the talk about the vaccine and now being replaced by the ongoing saga of Brexit, that 500 people are still dying every day from COVID. The story may have moved on, but unfortunately, there are still huge amount of deaths occurring, and transmission is still, although coming down, is still incredibly high. And what's shocking about it is that if you try to find any data around race and death by COVID, you would struggle. You would struggle to find any information whatsoever about what the scenario is. So all we've had from the government is denial that racism is a factor. We've had no recommendations that have been implemented that made any difference, even in collecting statistics to understand the scale of the problem or why that it's happening. That's why our union are supporting the call for public inquiry, not because we think the government are going to do something special, but because it's a way of forcing the government to acknowledge the fact that something needs to be done about the question of the racial disparity. We roughly know that you're twice as likely to die if you're black, if you've got COVID. We know that, or we're told that, but it's very difficult to quantify beyond that, because they're not collecting the statistics for able to us know. And I suppose that's the disregard for human life in the first place. You couple that with what happens when you are actually in a workplace where things aren't being done safely, where there is a risk in that environment, and trying to get the employer to even acknowledge the fact that there should be an incident form for every time someone believes they've caught COVID in the workplace. Again, is an uphill struggle to get them to accurately report what the scale of the crisis is within workplaces at the moment. And very much the pressure is on the individual. And actually, if you raise something in that context, it can be increasingly difficult. And what we found out from the first lockdown was that if you are black, you're less likely to report it. If you did report it, you're more likely to be reprimanded for it, and that somehow the way they get around this is basically forcing you into submission without you being able to have a voice. That's why trade unions are so important at the moment. That's why so many large numbers of people are joining trade unions, but they won't stay in a trade union unless the trade union actively campaigns around the issue that can find better organisation, that can find representatives. Within my union, the biggest growth of memberships are in schools and in social care. Obvious reasons why, both in the front line in terms of health and safety, but you will not retain those members unless you start to organise them in defence of their health and safety and their rights. And that's why they joined the union, primarily because of those concerns about that situation. And you know, what's really important then to happen is that trade unions need to get a grip of the fact that actually black members are joining trade unions or want to be active in the trade unions and often find their path blocked, not necessarily because of race, sometimes just because the union organisation has got into a way of working that is quite conservative, if you don't mind the expression, with a small c. They haven't got used to reaching out to wider layers of people, haven't got used to actually encouraging new people to be involved in the structures and involved. And, you know, if you had to look at the structures of, and I think my union is pretty good about challenging racism as a union in terms of what it says, but you had to look at the amount of black reps there are in the union or the amount of black branch secretaries or people active in full-time seconded positions, you'd have to say that that was lacking. So part of this, and I think, you know, COVID has put the issue about racism full and centre. Black Lives Matter has put the issue about resisting racism full and centre. And my experience is that more and more black members are looking for a way to be actively involved within their union to actually try and organise themselves and to campaign for their rights. But, you know, we recognise that racism is not an issue just for black people, that's an issue for all of us, that the lack of unity weakens the whole trade union movement. And actually the black workers can be an asset in building union organisation and raising the arguments like discrimination, but they should not be left to deal with those things on their own. It is a collective bargaining issue for the union. So some of the things that I would suggest that unions need to look at, they need to look at if someone gets, like in my workplaces, we've had people insulted by young people or service users because of their race, you know, then I would expect the employer to want to know that. We have now we've got a hate crime reporting system within the workplace. You shouldn't have to go to the police. Not that many black people have much confidence in the police about reporting these incidents. You should be able to go to your employer. They have a duty of care to you. You should be able to report it to them and expect something to be done. Yeah, and the union should be part of that conversation about what needs to be done in those scenarios. We should be in a situation where every employer is looking at the fact that they're more likely to have staff employed at the lowest grades, or, you know, within many local authorities in the Northwest, they'll be underemployed. What I mean by that is if you looked at any local authority and the ethnic minority population within it, you could guarantee you that a local authority will have a lower percentage of those employed within their organisation. And I believe in schools, when Unison did a survey, the figures were even lower in terms of employment. And you'd think a local school is supposed to serve its local population, it should reflect the local population it serves. Well, we're nowhere near it. We're banging in about 1 or 2%, when often the ethnic minority population is 15%. Yeah, these are things that need to be tackled by the union with the employer, because ultimately we've got to be in the game of, yeah, we've got to protect people's health and safety, but we've got to be challenging racism ourselves. We cannot rely on the government to do that, obviously, because the government are part of that institutional racism that is being used against us. Whether we look at the hostile environment, we look at the treatment of the refugees, whether we look at the way they scapegoat Muslims, all those things put us at risk all the time, because immediately you get identified. I remember once my dad told me, he's passed away now, but he told me when the first term the asylum seeker was used, he felt that when he walked down the shops, although he'd been in Britain 20 years, the people were staring at him thinking he's one of them, one of those asylum seekers. That's the kind of environment that they've created with the vans that went round with Theresa May, with the hostile environment they perpetrated, the way they've treated refugees that are trying to flee across the channel to some sort of safety. That's what they've done and the environment they've created. And it isn't a surprise that workers find themselves in that position. But we find ourselves in a moment where we kind of come to a juncture, haven't we? The government are going to try and inflict a huge amount of pain on working class people and even more on black people in this scenario, because they're going to not only do us over, but then scapegoat us for it occurring in the first place, almost like a double whammy we're going to experience in the next few months. And it's either the time for the trade union movement to start to organise and make sure it's being inclusive and bringing black workers into their union, bringing them into positions of organisation, encouraging them to develop within the side of the union movement and encouraging a fight back, yes, against racism, but against the austerity that they're going to try and impose, the COVID austerity they're going to impose on us. So this is a huge demand on us as a trade union movement, and it's a challenge we should rise to and welcome, because I've never experienced this many black workers wanting to feel like they're part of the union, wanting to feel organised, and therefore we have to reach out to them, organise that together to use the weight of the trade union movement. I'll finish on this example. If Marcus Rashford can defeat the government twice, yeah, what can 6 million trade unions do? What can 6 million trade unions do? The task is out there to meet that demand. We need to protect people's health and safety. We need to fight against racism. We need to fight against this government.
Thank you very much for that, Ameen. That's given us a lot of things to think about. And, you know, I'm mindful when you're speaking about the conservative nature of trade unions, you know, and as a woman getting involved in trade unions, I've always known that that was the case, like, you know, that we need to look at how we make it more accessible for people and less bureaucratic and more reflective of the membership, or, you know, that it serves, or the you know, the society that it serves. And when you look at some of the campaigns that have been building up through the pandemic, that have been outside of the trade union movement, I mean, I know lots of us have been involved in them as well, but the number of black and ethnic minority workers that are involved in those are certainly more visible than actually in the trade unions themselves. So I think there's certainly a lot that we should be doing in the trade union movement to make it more inclusive. And I think, you know, I think that as well, you know, you started off with Brexit. Well, as a trade union movement and as health and safety, we've got a lot to fear from Brexit. It's going to, you know, the Brexit's not being done for our benefit. It's not, you know, we're not driving that. It's business that's driving it. It's global capitalism that's driving it. And it's about dismantling any regulations, any protections that workers have. And that's going to impact on us all and impact on the most vulnerable workers the most. So we've got, I mean, and there's been a lot of chat, I think, in the chat box, but I will throw it open to, if you want to indicate, if you want to speak, then please, if you can, use your hands up, which I think is on the participants. If not, just put your hand up and I'll see you. It's just that you go over 2 screens, so I might miss some of you. So who wants to start? Oh, Laura, do you want to unmute? Laura, yeah, that's it. Hiya, Laura.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm calling from Toronto, Canada, and this is an exceptional insight as to you know, what's been said. In Canada, it's a similar type of situation too, where a lot of people of color, in particular Black people, have been hugely affected by COVID-19. In fact, the Black population accounts for the highest amount of deaths in the country, hovering at 26%. And in looking at other different forums, I believe in the States, the Black population is also the highest, one of the highest count, just under Native American and Latinx, hovering at believe 32% in terms of deaths. So I had a couple of questions. I'm just going back into the chat here real quickly so that I can get to what those questions were. So the first is, how is it going to be tracked? Because we know that racism has been the main cause for quite some time. Knowing that this is a situation, what actions have been taken, and how is it going to be tracked to ensure that resolutions are being met, and that it has been achieved? Because I think that oftentimes what happens is that there's a push for action. There's a lot of forums, a lot of meetings and organizations talking about the ill effects of racism and whatnot, but then there is nothing further about it. There's no ways of tracking it, but for many other things, such as you know, budgetary requirements, there's a way of tracking that. If there were programs that was in its inception to its realization, there's ways of tracking that. So I'm pretty sure that there's a way to track racial incidents and measuring how that is being reduced.
Okay. So you have another question? Yeah. Did you have another question, Laura? Is that all right for now?
that was one of the questions. The other quick question, here, I'm just trying to scroll back through.
I've caught you on the hop here, Anna.
Maybe come back to that. Maybe come back to that.
In terms of how the resources such as PPEs, increased wages, promotions for Black workers and people of color, along with the protection of from racial trauma derived from racism, how is that being resolved as well? Because that does account for a lot of the toxic workspaces.
Thank you so much for that, and it's really good to have you join us from Canada. I wasn't aware that we'd had an international audience tonight, but that's brilliant. Thank you so much for your questions. Does anybody else want to ask a question before I bring in the speakers to respond? James Robinson.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. I just wanted to ask a question around the individual risk assessments for Black workers in regards to COVID. And was there anything specific that we should be looking to be included in them or considered? I think that would be helpful to understand a bit more around that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And Andrea, and then we'll bring the speakers back in. I think we can hear you, Andrea.
Yeah, you can. Sorry, I was trying to do my video as well, but it's frozen. I think this is probably a question for Wilf, actually. Thanks to all the speakers. You're all really good presentations. I think that I mean, there's a lot of the government has set up a lot of sort of research studies to look at the disproportionate impact of COVID on.
Just lost you for a minute, Andrea.
A couple of weeks ago. Oh, sorry, I think it was a Channel 4 programme I was watching was saying that the government have ruled out examining the role of structural racism. Is that right? I mean, they've kind of, like Wilf was saying, they've set up all these kind of research projects to tell us what we already know, and then they seem to be ruling out the thing that would actually make a difference. So
the real cause, yes.
Yeah, so I just wondered if somebody could kind of say whether I heard that right. I'm sure I did, but
yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Right, Wilf, would you like to come in first? You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, that would help, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I'll try and briefly sort of just touch on all those questions, but I'll start by saying is that one of the things that we have to realise is that racism is a political issue and an economic issue. It's not just a problem about social interactions. And I always say it's not a zero-sum game. Some people benefit from racism, and we have to understand that, and who it is that benefits, and why it is that whatever they say, really what they want to do is keep it in place, because actually it's about exploiting people, and it's about oppression, and it's about making money, and it's important to always focus that, because it's not an accident. Racism in our society is not an accident of history. And in that sense, firstly, I'll deal with the last question, because no, you're perfectly right. And what the government in this country is doing is sort of launching a culture war, and saying it's all about people's culture. It's nothing to do with institutions. It's nothing to do with us and what we do, or with our policies. And so they've set up a number of inquiries, and they set up this race commission. But what we have to take heed of is not just what they set up, but who they bring in. And consistently, they brought in people who have said, we don't believe there's such a thing as institutional racism. We don't believe there's such a thing as structural discrimination. This is all about, you know, and if you want to talk about race, this is playing the race card, and it's all about a victim culture. And that's no accident. They're doing it on purpose, and they're doing it on purpose to undermine the arguments that we're making. And we have to be clear that that's part of what we're dealing with, because actually, a lot of the things I talked about earlier in terms of protecting workers cost money, and they quite simply don't want to spend the money on protecting workers. They prefer to put it in their bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. In terms of the questions about, you know, how do you track progress? You know, I mean, I think there's been lots of recommendations in this country over the years about having proper measurable action plans with targets. You know, we do it in every single other area. You know, when it comes to making money, you know, employers have targets which they pour over. They monitor whether they're getting to the targets. They assess their action plans to see whether they're getting, you know, making enough money. You know, if we want to reduce race equality, and we've got very clear measurements and an awful lot of areas about what race equality, what racial inequality is in this country. We have to set targets to reduce it, and we have to set actions, positive actions, around how we're going to do it. And if those actions don't work, we have to come up with other actions. But ultimately, you know, actually, you can see if what you're doing is working, because actually the measurement of inequalities reduces. And so I think that's a thing for us as the trade union movement, because I mean, many people will have heard me say it, is that we can't just say what we don't want. What we have to say is what we do want. What we do want employers to do. We have to have our own agenda, because far too much of this has been hived off of some kind of policy. You know, let's have a diversity and inclusion policy. Let's have this policy. And I always say to companies, listen, if your managers were measured on this performance and they lost money, right? They lost money in their wage packet because of racial inequality in the areas that they measured, you'd soon see change. So there's got to be consequences, right? Because the problem is we got in our society at the moment is people can perpetuate institutional and individual racism, and there's no consequences. I mean, in terms of the point about resources, I'll just refer to the previous point I made about this being a political issue, right? The government quite simply don't want to spend resources on this, and our challenge is how do we build campaigns and how do we build power to organise to force them to spend those resources on us. Because one of the shocking things about what's happened during the pandemic is the profiteering. And I hate the war analogy, but where I think the war analogy is really accurate is the amount of profiteering that has gone on as a result of our misery. You know, we've heard, you know, newspaper stories about billions of pounds being wasted on inappropriate PPE equipment, companies getting billions of pounds for track and trace systems that don't work. And where's that money gone? Well, I'll tell you what, people in the private sectors and big corporations have pocketed it, and they pocketed it at our expense, and it's our money. And sometimes we forget when the government talk about, oh, you know, we're spending all this money. It's our money. It's our tax money, right? And it, you know, we have to say, actually, it's not just down to you how you spend it. You know, we want to make choices about how that money is spent, and we want to make sure that money is spent in a way that protects us. And finally, just on the point about individual risk assessments, I mean, I think one of the things that if employers are doing individual risk assessments, we have to force them to do is to look at whether or not people are in a situation financially, right, to be able to look after themselves, right, either through, you know, furloughs, through shielding, so that they are not in a position to where they're forced to come into work. Because I do think, you know, where individual risk assessments really do play a part is about affordability to be ill, right? And we're in a situation in this country where sick pay is rubbish, right? Quite frankly, you can't live on it. You know, even the government arrangements in terms of furlough, it wasn't full pay. It was 80% of pay, and if you're low paid worker, you can't afford to do that. And of course, it didn't cover. It only covered employees and not workers, which meant thousands of people, especially migrant workers who had no recourse to public funds, were not covered by anything at all. So if employers want to do individual risk assessment, as I say, we need to make them to do collective workplace assessments. But if they're going to do individual work, if they're going to do individual risk assessments, that is also a point of us being able to put pressure on them to say, listen, pay up, right? Protect your workers. You know, we want, you know, this individual is insecure. We want to make sure that if they go off, there's agreement that they get full sick pay, you know, full pay when they're off sick, that actually, you know, they don't lose out because they're not working hours, so they get paid their average. All of those kinds of things, we have to use that to our advantage, and not just turn it into some kind of medical model about whether or not, you know, they've got this condition or that condition. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mo, would you like to add anything? You're on mute.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, one of the things that we did was like for Black, Asian, ethnic minority, like we incorporated in the risk assessment for Black, Asian, ethnic minorities for employers must have a duty to, for those people with vulnerabilities and for people with high risk and stuff, to question them and ask them individually what the employer can do to help them, and if they need time off or if they need a shift change and so forth. So those things were taking place, not in all companies. Certainly my company did do that in the risk assessment. So not all companies were putting that in, and that did make some sort of difference, because we then immediately saw on our employers app, which is then it went out to every worker, which then they assessed, asking health questions to all workers about their health questions, and then they fed back, you know, once they got their information from the workers, then they some workers were interviewed and sent to occupational health, and then that made some changes, you know, assisted them. But that didn't happen, obviously, the time that we wanted it to happen. It happened a lot later.
Okay, thank you very much, Mo. Ameen, can I just ask him, I mean, have you seen these really detailed risk assessments that they're asking people to, you know, where they mark them on I don't know, and you become a high risk, low risk, medium risk, whatever. I mean, we're really concerned about those and the way that being used. But what's your opinion of those?
I think the problem comes about for members actually feeling empowered to be able to actually say if they don't feel safe. That's the biggest problem. You know, as a form of trying to establish a level of risk in someone's life, in some way it does it, you know. The problem obviously is you can end up being medium or whatever label they put on it, and still be putting your life at risk when they should be taking measures to protect you. And that's just about confidence and being able to challenge the system. That's what we have to empower our members to do, to be able to say no, to be able to say that they have to find you a different work that's safer, and for the union to support them in fighting for their rights. And to feel they have the power of the union to actually say no to management if they believe they've been put in unsafe working conditions. And that's why the confidence of the union, like someone was asking about how do we measure these things? Well, I measure about our union density, how many people are willing to go on strike, how many people are willing to be involved in a public sector pay strike and our pay freeze and join with the private sector in that battle. These are the tests that we'll be judged by. The confidence of our side to resist is how we'll know whether we're doing well or not. And you know, that's how I see it, because they're not gonna, you know, we could figures can tell you whatever they want to, but we know that the challenges that we face will be met by how many disputes we win and the confidence of our class to be able to stand up for our rights and fight against racism and our rights, you know. So, you know, for me, a target in the next few months will be, can I get my union to take the pay freeze seriously? Because we have to get over 50% of our members to get past the threshold across the whole of the country to be able to force a coordinated national strike. That's what we want to see. We want to see a general strike over pay, don't we? Not just because for the money, although we could do with the money, because we deserve it and they don't. And they've taken it from us and they want us to pay for it. And I think those things are so important. Me and Wilf will be involved in trying to build a bigger stand up to racism demonstrations across the country in March. How big will they be? How many workers will be involved? How confident will we be in those protests and demanding our rights to against the racist society? So I think these are the sort of measures we have to test ourselves by at the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple more speakers. Jonathan Fluxman.
Hi everyone, and thanks very much, Janet. As usual, an amazing meeting organised by Hazards, and thanks very much to the three speakers for their great contributions. I just wanted to make two quick points. Just also to offer greetings and solidarity from Doctors in Unite, of which I'm a member. We recently wrote a response to a consensus statement released by Public Health England, the Health and Safety Executive, and the Faculty of Occupational Medicine on how to mitigate workplace risks to COVID with a focus on Black and Asian workers. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen such a whitewash document from three official bodies ever. It is absolutely dreadful. I mean, talk about willful blindness. It basically said the problem is the health education message is not getting through to Black and Asian workers because people are culturally different and people speak different languages. So what we got to do is improve the health education message. Zero mention of structural racism, zero mention of no voice for Black workers, zero mention for the pitiful state of health and safety enforcement in this country, and on and on and on we go. I mean, if people want to see our statement, it's on our website. But I think it's really important to challenge official agencies when they come out with, you know, this complete nonsense. I mean, it was absolutely a disaster. The second thing I just wanted to tell people about is, or to raise again, following up on Wilf's comments on this, about, you know, Black and Asian bodies being the problem and the issue of genetics, because it still raises its ugly, nonsensical head in the most esteemed academic journals in the medical literature. And I really think we need a coordinated response to this, because not only is it a smokescreen for structural racism and the underlying causes of the disproportionate deaths, but it also is a continuation of race science, which people will probably know has been the justification since the days of colonialism for the oppression and exploitation of Black people across the world. And for academics these days to say, oh, genetics probably plays an important part. I mean, you know, the new vaccine comes out. So some professor says, oh, well, we must check to see whether there's a difference in the way Black people respond to the new vaccine. There's zero evidence for this. And I would really like to build a network of doctors and scientists and other interested people so we can systematically do a literature search. Whenever this comes out in the newspaper, we challenge it and completely discredit this, and even go to the funders of research and the ethical bodies that have to approve research studies and say, look, you cannot approve research that is based upon a fundamental scientific error, i.e. lumping all Black and Asian people together when there's huge genetic differences across populations. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in that work, please do get in touch with me. Janet has my contact details. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. You've raised some important points then. We'll come back to the speakers and see if they've got anything to add, to, any comments on them. Phil, you wanted to speak.
Yes, the speakers that have just gone, I think, excellent, great points that have been raised. The way I deal with this issue about individual COVID risk assessments, because we have that point system that you mentioned, and they use it throughout Camden. We challenged it at the very beginning because they had white males and Asian women in the same slot category for scoring. So we had to sort that problem out for starters. It was ridiculous. But having sorted it out, in the main, it is useful to get a snapshot, but it's not the full picture. And I think people need to recognize if you're going to have something like that, don't take it as a Bible, because it's not. Because one of the things that have happened during this pandemic, we had people shielding and having to shield themselves. The government threw that out. And a lot of people in BME communities are being caught up in that, and they've been putting their health at risk because they've been made to go back to work. And that has to be challenged. We do challenge it in Camden, but we do have a very good employer, thank heavens. We don't have a White House, and they do listen to what we say. They haven't forced people to go back to work. They've continued in the main the percentage in the buildings that they had at the original lockdown, so that proper safety COVID buildings throughout the borough. But I do agree with everyone when they're saying we've got to challenge this issue at the grassroots. We've got to get people working together, not just in unions, but in community organizations, working together collectively, not in separate silos, but collectively working together to promote a campaign across the whole of the UK to sort this out. Black lives do matter, and you can't do that unless you're properly prepared to take what one of the speakers said, industrial action. If it has to be a general strike, so be it. We could do it on pay. We should do it on this issue to protect people in our community, because this government are frightened to give increased taxes on the current people who are actually paying taxes. My view is, why don't they get the bastards who are not paying any tax whatsoever and have done for decades, and say to them, you're paying for this pandemic, here's the bill, and do it that way, rather than having other people have to pay for that.
I think we probably all agree with that, Philip. Does anybody want to ask a question that's not got the blue hand signal, you know, just wants to put the hand up? I don't want to discourage anybody that's not found how to do it mechanically. You all right? Okay, would the speakers like to come back? Don't know. Ameen, would you like to come back?
I don't really know what else to add, really. I mean, I just think that we've just got to work out how to engage our membership in a wider way and see that as a priority in what we're trying to do, because you can get the feeling that you're the only one that's active in your union. But at a time like this, health and safety in particular means that everyone's affected by what's happened during this pandemic. Everyone wants to be engaged in some way. And obviously we know that people are prey to mad conspiracy theories and pandemics. So to do nothing in this scenario is to let the right-wing agenda and voice be heard and not ours. And we have so much to say in terms of organising people and be giving them hope that they don't have to put up with this situation anymore. No one wants to go back to austerity that we had before. No one's going to accept it from a government that basically want to line the rich and make us pay for it. And therefore we have to show that we're willing to stand up for working class people and resist. And we have to get that message out far and wide and encourage people to think about their health and safety, think about their life and what sort of life they want to live in and contribute to.
Thank you, Ameen. That's a good point. Well made. Mo, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, a couple of things really. Three short things. One on this traffic light system, which I first saw emerging in the health service. And for me, the problem with it is that, you know, if you're amber or green, you can carry on, right, and be exposed. If you're red, what they want to do is get rid of you, get you out of the workplace, right? It does not it does not force them to do anything about people's safety actually in the workplace. And that's what we have to understand, because we all know that management's reactions to things, you know, when there are issues to raise, is to do the minimum thing that they can and try and get away with the minimum. And it's always seemed to me that this has been, you know, the response. Oh yeah, well, you know, we'll ask it. You know, we'll put together this simple questionnaire and ask you if you've got these conditions, and if you've got these, you know, if you've got all these conditions, really, you should just go away and get out of our hair, and we don't really care what happens to you. And everybody else carry on as normal. Thank you very much. Well, we don't care whether you're safe or not, really. And that's sort of been the kind of attitude. Because actually, you know, what happens in a collective space, it seems to me management don't think is any of their responsibility at all. So we have to make it our responsibility. I think Jonathan was absolutely right, and you know, I'd really love to talk to you a bit more about that, Jonathan, because I think, you know, off the back of this, you know, and it's not just. It's not just been a thing that's happened during the pandemic, but we saw it happening, you know, beginning to happen. I've seen it happen over the last 10 years. More and more dodgy science, which is eugenics based, coming back into the public arena as serious research, and it's so dangerous. You know, it's like going backwards in time. And we really have to have a system, as you say, to robustly challenge it, and to especially robustly challenge people who are funding this damn stuff, and universities and other academic institutions that are allowing it to be taught as if it was some kind of proper education. Because, you know, it is, especially in terms of what we see with nationalism and nativism and all the rest, it is so dangerous. And finally, I wanted to say, just on the point about the pandemic and austerity, you know, we have to understand we've already paid for the pandemic. We paid in our lives, with our lives. And one of the things that, you know, people find a bit, I would say, well, I don't read newspapers, but I do read the Financial Times because they have to tell the truth. Because financial investment decisions are made on the information in there sometimes. And reading the Financial Times through the pandemic, what I've seen is people making billions, right? So when people want to talk about austerity, right, actually, we have to point to the people who've made billions out of our misery and say, if you want money to pay for this, go and get it off of them, because we've already paid the price.
Yeah, absolutely. We have paid in our lives. And you know, the point about eugenics, I think it's terrifying what's been going on in the last few years. And you know, and I think we absolutely have to challenge that in any place where it raises its head. And you know, and I hope you can do some more on that with Jonathan. That'd be great. And Moe, and I'll come to you last but not least, just to say, you know, with our trade union movements, 46% of the working people, and that was before the pandemic. So we've got a lot of people that out there who are not in trade unions, and a lot of young people who are not in trade unions. You know, a massive amount of young people are in 0 hours contracts, you know, vulnerable contracts, and they're not in trade unions. So what do we need to do to, you know, to change that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you pass, even if you go to like a TGR Fridays or wherever you go, you see a young worker, just go and ask them, are you a member of a trade union? Why it's good to be a member of a trade union. When you come as a collective, what you can do, what you can achieve. You know, we had, you know, in Unite Sports Direct, TGR Fridays, hospitality workers constantly engaging in regular battles. Young workers face lots of you know, issues at work, underpaid, bullied, treated, you know, like young workers can't do things and stuff, and sometimes made to work extra longer hours because they think that they can maximize them, because they're on shorter wages than other adult workers and stuff. So yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of potential. Like, I mean, even in the union, lots of the major unions, especially like Unite and GMB, there's got young members committee, so young people can get involved in that and become trade unions. Like myself, I wasn't a confident speaker before, but when I was in the young members committee, I learned I was public speaking skills and stuff, so managed to be able to confidently speak up. Some young workers might not be confident, and then they find themselves, like, you know, fighting for injustices, you know, so you know, beating up the bosses and stuff can be fun actually sometimes. So, you know, young people might find that as a you know, road and stuff. You never know. I mean, speaking to your, like, I was speaking to my nephew. He's got his first job, and as an admin and stuff. And I told him, don't join the trade union. Those kind of things make a difference, and stuff. Some people don't know. I mean, you know, don't know nothing about trade unions and what we can do, what our potential is and stuff. So yeah, joining a trade union, getting young people to join in, getting active, we can make massive change and differences. Young people are not the future. We are here. We are now.
You certainly are. Thank you very much for that, Mo.
Yeah,
so thank you so much for joining us this evening, everyone. And solidarity, and, you know, we pass our solidarity to those victimised NEU safety reps at the moment, but there's others out there that are being victimised through the pandemic and certainly not being supported by their employers. Thank you so much for your contributions and the discussion that we've had, and especially to our fantastic speakers this evening. We've got a lot of food for thought, I think, lots of priorities to campaign on, and lots of action to take as a result of it. We need decent jobs and decent lives. We want to be free from unsafe and unhealthy work, and free from discrimination and the inequalities that leave workers injured, ill, and ill with ill health, and sadly a lot of workers who've died. And we say no more. So thank you so much for joining us, and you can unmute yourselves if you want, and we'll finish there. Thank you so much.
Janet, could I be cheeky?
Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Could I be cheeky, Janet, and ask if we could have a group photo that I'll tweet out?
Lovely.
If everybody's comfortable with it. So